Assalamu alaikum. This is the Muslim Wall, and today I've decided to talk about Ibn Hazm a little bit, as I've been going through his Tawq al-Hamama, his magnum opus, and although it's not strictly theocratic or religious book, if you read through it, you'll find it more to be a book of poetries, book of verses, but his inspiration behind the book is very clear. His if you look through the verses and read the poems, you see that there is that his faith has guided him to write about the stuff that you wrote. But yeah, so we're going to talk about a little bit on how the two extreme groups that we alluded to in our earlier video about Imam Ghazali, the Sufi extreme, the Salafi extreme, opposed his views. So I can see how Ibn Hazm actually goes through the same pattern of reception to these two different groups, and I would not per se try to defend him as much as I would like to portray him as a human, because he is a human. He's just a scholar and regarded as undoubtedly one of the greatest muhaddiths of all time. Even Ibn Rahimahullah actually alluded to him as one of the greatest muhaddiths, and many other scholars like Al-Wahabi and others. Now, the first allegation against him, it comes from the Sufis, and it's actually true that Ibn Hazm he actually outright rejected qiyas, which basically means analogy. So he wouldn't really subscribe to analogous interpretations of the text. He would be more. So he was a Zahiri, and he actually founded the school called the Zahiri School of Thoughts, where they would just take the text of her scholarship, and they would just take them as in the face value, and apply them to derive the rulings of fiqh. So, that's actually an approach taken by Ibn Hazm, where he didn't see the necessity of qiyas in the first place. Now, as a Hanafi, obviously, I would not agree with that. I would say that qiyas is as much a part of the jurisprudence as any. Obviously, it comes after the Quran and the Sunnah, and obviously the Ijma, but it's actually a part of the methodology that all the four imams of our madhabs actually followed. So I wouldn't really call it heresy per se, as many people would portray that he was a heretic for rejecting qiyas. It doesn't really make him a heretic. It's actually just an approach that he took. He was a mujtahid himself. He just did the ijtihad, and he just never saw the necessity of qiyas. So as much as I would disagree with him in this regard, I wouldn't call him heretic just for rejecting qiyas. Now, his school of thought obviously gave birth to a lot of problems in the modern times. So I would say that was, again, it's not up to him actually to because it could never be that he would be able to control his followers that came about thousands of years after him. So I wouldn't really hold him responsible for that. It was just an approach that he took, and he just got mythologized into that particular line of thought. And the other extreme is Salafis actually also, some Salafis at least, would also oppose him for some of his, as they say, heretic views. Although obviously we know the Salafis, at least the Salafi extremes, to be much literalist themselves. And they would appreciate the way that Ibn Hazm actually gathered his knowledge and structured his scholarship. But at the same time, because of the literalism, it takes Ibn Hazm to make some of the rulings of fiqh, derive some of the rulings of fiqh, which were not, well, I would say not very beauteous in standard of the other four madhabs that we have. Some of these rulings would be outright, very weird, and some of those would be, ridiculous in terms of if you read through them, some of these rulings in Al-Muhalla, they would be just contrary to the adab of scholarship itself. Now, for that, some Salafis would actually come at him, and that's where the paradox comes in, because the literalism is actually one of the approaches that the Salafis, the modern Salafis, have adopted themselves, and so by their own standard, they're actually, although they try to, as they say, that they're trying to balance between the texts and the applications, and they're also trying to include qiyas in there, and so. I would say that their intentions are the right place, but at the same time, the paradox comes in when they're trying to, portray him as a villain for forwarding these views. And in any case, the classical scholars, even the scholars around the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, Rahimahullah, they all actually agreed on the fact that he is one of the greatest scholars within the bounds of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So I wouldn't say that he was far off. He would just, as I said, he's one of the greatest hadith narrators. He had an immense knowledge of the Quran and the hadith, obviously, because he grew up in an environment where it was predominant. The scholarship of Islamic scholarship was predominant. He also learned mantiq, logic, Greek philosophy, obviously psychology, which is not something I don't think he actually had grown up with those classic and ancient texts of the Greeks as well as the Arabic texts, so it must have had an influence on him. But as I said, if you go through Tawq al-Hamama, you would see this paradox between the paradox of the character that he was, because he was a literalist, but at the same time, in his Tawq al-Hamama, he was anything but a literalist. He would, compose those poetries, those verses with this much care and, intricacy that it would just make you wonder how good of a writer he was. And even though his history actually stems from a trauma, and that's what I think led him to become a very sharp-tongued individual, which is another allegation against him, that he actually badmouthed the scholars of the past that he didn't agree with. To which I say, obviously, it's not something defensible if that's the case, that he actually badmouthed the scholars and called them names. But that's the character that he is. I'm trying to understand from his point of view, a person who actually had it all when he was a kid, and then he had to be exiled. He lost it all, and then his works, everything, his brainchild was destroyed by the Sevilla Berbers, and so that led to the trauma that he had in his mind, and in him being this aggressive towards the others. Again, it's not defensible. I'm just trying to be an empath here. In any case, he had this immense knowledge of psychology, human relationships. If you just read through his Tawq al-Hamama, it's just actually mesmerizing as how good he is. And all I would say to that is that he was this man of honor. I'm trying to humanize him here. I'm not here actually to defend him from the allegations. The allegations are there, but I'm trying to humanize him for who he is. He's not a prophet. He was not a salaf. He was just a man, just a more learned man than us. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.